We are live.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Kilgore, and I'd like to welcome you to the July 8th, 2024 Planning and Economic Development Committee remote meeting. All council committee members and staff are participating virtually. And to help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. And we are streaming live on the Virtual Engagement Hub, which is accessible through the Virtual Engagement Hub link on the front page of the city's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. And for everyone out there, we'd like to say hello and welcome. For today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. And to call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 8187. At that time, your phone will be muted and you will hear the meeting live. And at this point, if you would like to speak, you need to press *3 to enter into the speaker queue. And at this time, I'd like to do a roll call and introduce the committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Council member and staff, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Good afternoon.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hello, everybody.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Hello, everyone.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good afternoon.
Assistant City Attorney Janice Ashley.
Good afternoon.
Director of Planning and Urban Design Stephanie Dahl.
Hello, everyone.
And Assistant Director of Planning and Urban Design Chris Collins.
Good afternoon.
And at this time, first thing on our agenda is to basically, the number one item is to approve the minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
These are minutes for June 10th, 2024.
Second.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second. This time I do a roll call. Councilwoman Sage Turner,
Aye.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman,
Aye.
and myself, aye. The number two thing on our agenda is the Unified Development Ordinance. It's an update strategy. The resource will be Stephanie Dahl from the Planning and Urban Design Director. And basically it'd be a staff proposal to give us an update on the growth and development ordinance and standards so that they are aligned with the adopted plans and the City Council's strategic priorities. And this particular presentation will be only for information only. No votes will be taken today on this item. This time, Stephanie, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Kilgore. Appreciate having this time to speak with you all today. And I wanted to start a little bit with the why. And Councilwoman Kilgore started that for me. Over 5 years ago, this city adopted Living Asheville, our comprehensive plan for the future. This document really sets the groundwork for all of our decision making. It's a policy guidance book that helps us with growth and development in the future. Typically, what a municipality does after adopting a comprehensive plan is to change all of their ordinances. And it's not as if city staff didn't change a lot of them. As a matter of fact, over the last 5 years, city staff has come to City Council 22 times to talk about text amendments to the UDO. However, we haven't necessarily focused in a way that will create a big impact. So the why behind this is that we want to create a bigger impact for our community when it comes to aligning those values and visions that we have in our adopted plans, that we have in council's annual priorities and their goals with the ordinances that we have to develop in our future. Slide. Some key takeaways for you when you leave today. I hope that you will not only be able to share with people that we were able to present a process on how we will collaboratively update Asheville's Unified Development Ordinance and other associated rules and regulations regarding growth and development, but that you will understand why we are handling the approach in this specific way. Part of it is based on the reality that staff resources are limited, and at this time, we can't recommend that a comprehensive update to the UDO takes place. And that is why, as noted in number 3 here, we are talking about focusing on selected sections of the UDO related to standards governing residential development. So we have already identified many of these sections, and we are hard at work identifying some other sections. And this are all revolving around housing supply, variety, and location. We also wanted to note to you that we will constantly be using a couple different lenses. One is an equitable housing lens, and then the other one is thinking about council's goals around neighborhood resilience when we're talking about housing supply as well. And then the last thing I want you to walk away remembering is that we have a schedule, we have a suggested schedule and priorities for many of the first starting efforts here to change the UDO. These will come to you in late summer and will serve as a soft kickoff to about a year or year and a half long progress. Slide. So, as mentioned, we are going to selectively update sections of the UDO to promote equitable housing production, especially along transit corridors and mixed-use districts, including downtown. This is part of that locational efficiency and emphasis to align with the community's values. Slide. We have several objectives in this project that we want to make sure that you're aware of. And also at the end, if there are any things at a high level objectives that we didn't cover, that might be one of the areas that we're interested in hearing from you on. So one of our objectives is to really provide a clear roadmap to council, advisory boards, and the community, anyone who might be participating, on what the city is going to address in the next year and a half, how the project will be performed, and who fulfills which roles. So that is what has been lacking in the past, and it's key to us moving forward in the future. We also want to transform key ordinances so that they're aligned with council's priorities and recognize that it's not just the comprehensive plan, but many other plans that we have created in the last 5 years, especially like the GAP plan and the upcoming affordable housing plan that you're considering, so that they support, so that our ordinances support plan objectives and goals. Really important for us, since the city has, I don't know, probably close to 200 volunteers that are serving on boards and commissions and giving us this great expertise and time, is we want to be able to harness that and provide a real role for them and make it more of a direct process for them to participate and also for the public to be involved in meaningful change. Slide. We also want to implement recommendations from the reports and studies that council has commissioned, including the missing middle study and the anti-displacement report. We want to create user-friendly, predictable development ordinances. We hear a lot about that from the community, and especially for the occasional user. This is key to making things equitable. Lastly, we want to emphasize transparency so that the public can easily find project information and understand what the next steps are in the project. Slide. So as mentioned, staff resources are limited, and we are going to be concentrating on housing. That's really going to be our big push. So in order to do that, we are going to focus on the most pressing issues only. And as you will see moving forward, that we're going to use the information that we have, but also the information that boards and commissions have, and run it through a filter in PED to be able to make sure we are focusing on the most pressing issues. So we're also going to make sure that we have a very predictable process that has a rhythm, and people can have expectations for about a year and a half, and people will know exactly how they can engage and exactly how they can get information. The last piece of this is to say we're really going to be looking at being agile in the way that we write code. So one of the things that we'll do in order to foster some progress is to adopt a smallest effort, biggest impact approach when writing and reviewing codes. Next. So how are we going to identify goal areas? Well, to a large extent, as we've discussed, they've already been identified for us. We are using Living Asheville as our policy guidebook, and then we have council's annual priorities that are adopted at the retreat to help guide us. So that's our big number one guide. After that, we have a list that the staff already has, and we'll be updating it, that talks about how those plans integrate and how the priorities that council has are interconnected in there. And we can identify the topical recommendations through that list, and then focus that list on council's affordable housing and neighborhood and climate resiliency priority areas. So we're calling this the work list. Slide. Just to note for, I know many of you have already seen these, but especially for other people who might be watching, that Living Asheville provides us a lot of example goals already. So exploring strategies to reduce the complexity of downtown development review, prioritizing growth and development within designated growth areas. And we actually have growth area maps to help us figure that out, including transportation corridors and transit corridors, which we mentioned that would be focusing on, ensuring that new development has the appropriate infrastructure to support it. So all of these goals are how we're going to be thinking about what is next for changing ordinances. Slide. Then how do we evaluate our existing ordinances? So taking that working list, we're then going to ask ourselves about 5 questions. One is it considered broken or a major issue by staff, the development committee, boards, or the public? We have notes on our list that already says these are the ones that we hear about quite often and developers struggle with when it comes to housing creation. Does staff hear complaints about it regularly? And this might be a little bit different, that maybe it's just an old ordinance, it's a remnant, and I should to let you know that probably we figure that there's a good percentage of our work that is, almost considered housekeeping or elimination, we'd say reduction of things that are unnecessary in our ordinances. We'll ask ourselves if it's actually realistic for our current economy. So we all know that there are certain things from our global economy or to our local economy that really drive how housing or any development is produced, and listening to the stories and talking with the different development stakeholders is going to be really an important part of it. Then what could have a big impact? So this is very much important to do some analysis and be data driven in the way we approach this. And then lastly, how can we come to a reasonable consensus? What I mean by this is not just that everybody should get together and agree on something, but staff is really interested in trying to move forward things that aren't going to take 6 months, 9 months for us to get bogged down in and move forward the things that everybody at least can say, well, we can come together on that. We'll do those first. Slide. Key part of this, as I mentioned, is our advisory boards. So they're already providing us pretty regular input, and however, they don't have a clear process or a framework to work on with text amendments to the UDO right now. So we're going to try to create that framework starting actually this month. So we'll be asking all advisory boards to attend a special leadership summit 2 times a year. And at that summit, they will be providing advice both to council recommendations. One of those summits will align with their annual reporting. So that's just coinciding with that. It's not necessarily so new. And then another one is going to happen in July. And it provides them additional opportunities to speak directly to council. And we'll be pulling out those recommendations and asking them to focus on recommendations that are clearly related to our UDO and our standards and documents about growth and development. So those are design guidelines and the SSTM. And they can do all the other recommending that they would like as well. So that's going to help them better connect to council. And then Planning and Zoning Commission, who already has a role by ordinance to provide you a direct recommendation on whether or not to approve an ordinance, will have some special role in the process in addition to that. So we're going to be collaborating with them pretty regularly. Slide. Another big how that's important for us to be able to be successful is to try to come to you with a regular delivery of bundles of amendments. So what we are proposing right now is to bring 2 or more ordinance amendments to City Council for review 3 times a year. So every 4 months. And this doesn't mean that there'll be 10 of them. You know, as I mentioned, it's 2 or more. And it doesn't mean that if you can choose to not review some of them, we're going to work that out through PED. That's exactly what these council committees are for, but it does provide clarity around the project expectations, right? It does say we're going to be seeing this. That should be coming to us again in a few months. You know when it's coming. It creates clarity for boards and commissions on when, and even the public, right? On when new amendments are going to be targeted for review and how they can participate in the process. And then most importantly, this is really responding to a feeling amongst some of our community members, maybe board and commission members, that maybe we're not making enough progress. So we'll be able to evaluate how well we're doing at the end of a year and a half, based on whether or not we were, like how much impact we have made over time. Slide. So as I mentioned, we're really already doing a soft kickoff to this project. We have a lot of proposed text amendments to the UDO that are coming your way in late August and early September. So some of those are about reductions in barriers to housing production. These pieces may have come out of the missing middle study. Some of them are citizen proposed amendments. This includes flag lots and cottage clusters. There's also amendments that we are looking at from the Planning and Zoning Commission that are on your docket. And those are about reviewing, changing the review thresholds and also changing parking requirements for residential housing citywide. We're also developing an overlay that speaks to efforts for anti-displacement. And there are tree and landscaping amendments that are underway that were suggested by the Urban Forestry Commission in the past year that we are now vetting. And anything that we're not able to get through in an agile way in bundle number 1 can either move to bundle number 2 and fill in that cup, or council and or PED can say, these are things that we don't feel like it's important to focus on right now. We'll talk a little bit more about that process. Slide. So a little on the project rhythm and timeline, just to stress that this is an estimate only, because as you know, things happen. So we don't want to set up any expectations here that absolutely in February to April, staff, boards, and commissions will finalize the content for amendments in Bundle 3. But that's going to be our target. That's what we are aiming for. So what you can see is that if we are coming to you in August and September, let's just say September with bundle number 1, we then work with boards and commissions, and especially the Planning and Zoning Commission, to finalize the content for the amendments in bundle 2. And in January 2025, several things happen. There'll be a PED meeting where you all would review that bundle before it goes to council. And on a side process, advisory boards are attending a leadership summit to discuss their priorities to advise you for the upcoming bundles. And then those advisory boards are actually going to deliver those written recommendations to PED on potential changes for the buckets. So in the second council meeting in January, that's when you could consider adopting bundle 2. And then we'd already be working on bundle 3 and have a little bit of direction on that. And then again in February, there's a time period where we are working with boards and commissions again on the following bundle and reviewing that content and seeing what we can get through the Planning and Zoning Commission and off to you through PED and then to council. So I know this slide is got a lot of information on it and we can come back to it, but I wanted to share it as we move forward. Slide. There are some challenges to this process that we just want to say, hey, let's pause and have a reality check here for a minute. So one thing to note is that anytime we change one thing in the UDO, several other sections of the UDO need to be changed. Everything is interrelated, and there are many references to our standard specification and details manual and other documents like the design guidelines that are going to need to be updated every time that we update an ordinance. There's also a process of informing, consulting, engaging the public to be able to do this. It really takes time. So as much as we want to have a clear framework and, we want to drive some progress, we're really thoughtful that transparency, accessibility, and being authentic is important to this council. Slide. Of course, there are other work plan items that we have on deck. And we're going to need to focus our resources on this in order for it to work. So there might be less impactful things that staff or boards or commissions have wanted to work on that we're just going to all have to take a pause and take a breath and say what's important is to prioritize and focus moving forward to create that impact. Another challenge for us is that every time we change ordinances, we have to train our staff on how to administer those ordinances. So that's everything from plan reviewers to the people that are doing the enforcement and the people who are doing the customer service calls to let people know what they can do on their property or how to work on permits. Lastly, in order to make the UDO more clear and easier to navigate, we're going to have to rely on becoming more graphically oriented. And this is important for our occasional users, especially. And many of the folks that are working on the design guidelines or working on updating our public space management standards are the same people that we would be using to do the graphics for this. So this is all just to say that it can be done. And all we're doing is noting that at the outset that we have these challenges and that this process has been designed to acknowledge them and try to create mitigating strategies around them. Slide. So we mentioned the use of existing resources and how important that is, that we have to reprioritize and shift things around. Our two biggest resources for this project are our staff and our advisory boards. So we have to really focus. The goal for staff is to create enhanced accountability, people really understanding what we set out to do, why we're doing it, and to be able to deliver understanding all of those project challenges as well. So that means that consistent project rhythm, prioritizing the work program items and having a process set aside to do so, and then really creating an interdepartmental coordinating mechanism, which is pretty typical for a project of this size that involves many departments. And for our advisory boards, the goal is to support enhanced collaboration. So we hear from our boards all the time that they want to create more of an impact and do some meaningful change. And we're starting that with a mini kickoff leadership summit next month for some of our boards and commissions that are most involved with our ordinances and creating recommendations around the UDO. So we'll have that biannual intercommission leadership summit moving forward, and that framework of creating a regular time, not just once a year, but twice a year, for them to be able to submit recommendations to PED, focusing on UDO itself. Slide. clarifying roles. So you guys know your role. I'll tell you it. Just will remind you. So every year we get these general policy priority areas. These are really helpful for us. You say, this is what we want you to work on, and then we figure out how to do it, right? So another piece of your role in this particular project is to say that you're going to review those bundles of proposed text amendments every 4 months, and you're going to be expecting them. Staff does a lot of the administrative stuff and heavy lifting, obviously creating the working list and the bundles based on the input that we're hearing. We do research and analysis. We're sharing information and the lead on community engagement. We're going to have to draft the ordinances, process the proposals through the review process, train, and all of that kind of good stuff. Staff stuff. We do the work. So PED, what we're proposing is something that's a little bit new. So some of this is responding, hopefully, to what we have heard you say about PED being more involved in the UDO specifically, and helping make sure that that happens. So you would be reviewing the progress quarterly at these meetings, and then you have this role of considering recommendations from the board of commissions to make adjustments to that working list that we talked about. So that's the working list are really the bundle topical areas. So 2 times a year. That is going to provide us with a clarity of direction that is really going to make sure everyone is able to collaborate. If you were able to clearly let us know yay or nay on that working list, we can get to work and get the rest of that done. Other council committees will be consulted, so they can provide direct feedback to staff and PED on specific priority areas and proposed text amendments that they're interested in, and can work through the specific ACM, assistant city manager, and let them know what those topics are. Slide. So Planning and Zoning Commission, we highlighted them as kind of an advisory board that has a special role by ordinance to provide you with a recommendation on anything that comes through as a UDO update. But we're also asking that they would collaborate with staff on research and analysis, and collaborate with staff to actually develop the text amendments that are in the bundle. So that would be the back and forth about what about this, what about that? And we have started doing that with planning and zoning already with several of the text amendments that you'll be seeing. And then 2 times a year, they would coordinate with staff to help develop that ongoing working list. Slide. Other boards and commissions, we're going to offer up that they can research, review, and suggest edits. We're always happy to have that additional input. They have a great diverse representation of the community, and that's a really important part of this project. They will attend those inter-commission meetings 2 times a year and submit official comments on text amendments. However, they're not part of necessarily the official review process, but we're asking them to do that to planning and zoning so they can almost serve as a hub to understand what those other commissions are really thinking. And then they also coordinate with us to submit proposals, so 2 times a year. The general public, if you hadn't heard, the development forum that used to happen before the pandemic 2 times a year in the spring and in the fall is making its way back, and the Development Services Department is leading that initiative. That's going to be a great place for us to do a lot of informing, and people can attend that, and it will probably already also be live streamed. People can participate in stakeholder groups that we will have planned, and the other things that were on that slide before it moved forward. So more roles, attending monthly open house and providing public inputs to boards and commissions as through public comment. Slide. So we're going to have to be, with limited resources, pointed on our communications and engagement. And we're adopting an approach, 4 words: transparent, caring, predictable, and accessible. So here are just some examples of things that we think are going to be appropriate for this project. We almost always have a project website, right? I think we always do have a project website. So that is the case. But for this one, similar to the downtown safety initiative, we would have a monthly newsletter. We would have a web page that's separate from the project website that would just have clear information on what text amendments are being reviewed, and have links to the old versions, the new versions, and the marked up versions. Hold a monthly open office hours, get out into the community. I mentioned the development forum 2 times a year is an opportunity for us to do this kind of engagement. PED's quarterly review is a great opportunity for people to really hear about how things are being decided and see that policy making in action. And then, of course, we will have focus groups. Slide. So what we talked about today is a process to collaboratively update Asheville's Unified Development Ordinances and then the other documents associated with growth and development regulations. Everybody has a role, and we're going to provide clarity on those roles. We also talked about some of the pieces of the project that are challenges, including staff resources being limited, and how that means that a comprehensive update of the UDO is not recommended or feasible at this time. But we are excited to talk about updating selected sections of the UDO related to standards governing residential development and focusing on housing. These have started to be identified. These areas are underway, and we are addressing housing supply, variety, and location. For example, we really talked about focusing on transportation corridors, transit corridors, downtown, and our growth areas as outlined in Living Asheville. Lastly, we outlined the schedule and talked about how we've been prioritizing sections to be amended in the UDO, first starting with ordinances that are already on their way to you in late August and early September, and that this project is proposed to last for 1.5 years. So we thank you for your time and are interested in hearing from you any comments you may have or answering any questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. That was a lot, but it was very good information, and I really appreciate how you sort of laid everything out that's more understandable of how things are going to work. So we all, like you said, specifying what each person's role is. I think that is so impactful. And I'm looking forward to actually getting everything implemented so it can be up and running. So I'm quite sure our council women have a lot of questions. So Maggie, I can look at Maggie's face and tell.
Real person. Similarly to Sandra, I'm really excited to work on this and get this started. I think that, in another world, we'd hire a consultant and spend 2 years doing this. And although that would be a great relief to staff, I know because you all are very busy doing the work, I think it's going to be a really awesome experience for us to be quick and nimble, because there's so much knowledge in our boards and commissions and so much knowledge in our staff and our development community. So I'm just excited to do that and understand the trade-offs, because you already have full programmed plates running those services you run. So I'm excited to see y'all take this on internally. I think it'll be good. I think that we can strike that balance. I also was thinking about just generally how there's a lot of consensus on council. We've been working on affordable housing for 20 years, and we've had different highs and lows with providing housing in our community. But right now there's a lot of consensus that we need to work on affordable housing and supply, and to really target our review to our transportation corridors and to our downtown, to the places that for a long time the whole community said, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and really getting into it looks really good. A question I did have is in the deck on slide, what is that, 13 or 12, the project rhythm and timeline. I think I'm understanding what you're showing here. It's basically explaining we're going to be doing these bundles. And so while we're designing and thinking one bundle, we'll be deciding and tweaking another. And so it's almost like these circles overlapping where we're not just going to wait for an entire bundle to be created, adopted, edited, outreached, and then start another. We're going to kind of fold in to be sequencing so that we can do this in 12 to 18 months. Is that right? Like the picture in my head is kind of concentric circles side by side. Is that what you're envisioning for the timing?
That's generally correct, yes. And I think another point of this slide, in addition to showing that when we are working on one thing, another bundle is going to council, is to just help visualize for people, and we're going to get better at this when we kickstart the project, have visualize for people that there is a steady rhythm, right? That it's going to be regular, and we have these touch points and milestones like the leadership summit for our boards and commissions, like the quarterly review by PED that helps provide a framework.
Yeah. I think that's great. And I think that allows us to treat this housing emergency as the emergency it is. It allows us to move forward, but I do know that we'll all have to be really graceful with each other. I think you mentioned in the presentation, something might come through one bundle and it needs some more community engagement specifically around that topic. And so we thought it would be bundle 2, but now it's bundle 3. But what's nice is there'll be another bundle 3, so we can kind of move things around. But I do think some of the trickiest part of this will be to be swift with the things that we know clearly need to change, but also be inclusive when we need to pause and listen. And I think we'll just need to be going back and forth on that. And I think that what's also unique to this process is that a lot of times we approach stuff for good reason, and like missing middle, we're like, we know that's a specific strategy. We did a plan around it. It was, 12 to 18 months. We did specific community engagement around this. This is looking at a much broader swatch of changes in a condensed amount of time. So I think you've come up with a good process. I think this will help keep the boards and commissions and council and staff all rowing in the same direction. So I'm just doing mostly processing. I don't have a lot of specific questions. I am pretty excited though. I think that y'all have done a good job.
Yeah, general feedback. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this has answered so many of my own how is this going to work questions, because I feel like we're doing amazing things, and the way you've interconnected all of them is important, because we're just all over the place, but how they weave together and how they actually get through to council and who's putting them forward and how the people are layered in, the volunteer boards, et cetera. You did a remarkable job of kind of streamlining it into a process that can be followed. And I appreciate the continuity part. I was kind of expecting, here's what we're doing for 6 to 12 months, but you really, this is a format that we could kind of stick to longer than 18 months if it worked well, right? It's a good format. You guys did a great job. It looks like a plan for the planning department, really. I also love, I keep saying this, but how we did the boards and commissions kind of trial with HCD and AHAC is kind of what I see layering in here with PZ and this board and PED. And I think it's perfect. And I think it's going to give us a lot of structure to how these things move through without feeling like, sometimes I just feel like things come at us at council and we have to kind of, grow our entire learning process through the boards and commissions and that item on an agenda. But I feel like this way we'll be fed through a line of comprehensive interconnected plans and what's in stage next and what's going to be touched next. And I just really appreciate it. You're helping me understand the process. So I greatly appreciate that. And I'm excited to talk about the next item too. So I won't belabor this one, but I guess the boards and committees will kind of get an update on this kind of process will be available to them. That's awesome. Okay.
Absolutely. That's our next step.
Okay. Well, good job weaving everything together. It's a lot of stuff. I mean, orchestrating to implement is probably more of the tenuous part. You know, we can hire people and do studies and get input, but getting it out the door is complicated. So well done.
Maggie?
I guess my parting thought on process is, had we, like with the affordable housing plan, for example, HCD really led that on behalf of us as council because we all have such strong consensus that we want to work on that. But then there were touches that came to council, when the plan was scoped at the end, when we reviewed drafts. So I'm not sure what it looks like, but I'm hearing consensus around us that this looks great. And I know I've talked with P&Z leaders and there's enthusiasm there that it'd be nice at some point soon to maybe at a work session or just a memo to share this with all council in case there's any flags, since we're really embarking on kind of a big thing, a big planning effort, and we're doing it in-house, just making sure we're looping it through everyone. But my sense is everyone's pretty excited for it and will be, but that's just a tiny process suggestion.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I'll work with the city manager's office to figure out how that happens. Thanks.
Just Ben Woody, real quick, answer your question, Councilman Ullman, but I will say that the ACMs and city manager, we're working on developing the council committee's work plans. So as those begin to form, I think that'll be an opportunity where we can, as a council, see what each of the committees is working on. So for example, I'll be before you next month to really dive into what PED's work plan is going to be for FY25. And again, to your point, I think that's a chance to see what you're working on, but also show that back up to the full council. So, I mean, we're figuring it out, but we're getting there. So that was a good comment. And thanks for that.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. Greatly appreciate the update. Our next item on the agenda will be the proposed text amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance. That resource will once again be Stephanie Dahl, who's Planning and Urban Design Director, and she'll review a staff review of the text amendments to the UDO that have been developed by the Planning and Zoning Commission and Urban Forestry Commission. And this particular presentation will also be for information only. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Chris Collins, the Assistant Director, is going to handle this piece of it, and he's going to handle it very well.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. And Stephanie will get a chance to stop talking for a minute, and I will take over. I am really excited because what I'm going to present to you is really following up on what Stephanie just presented to you and getting us started in this process, right? So we're going to go ahead and take a look at some UDO text amendments that are coming your way. Next slide, please. So what we're going to see today is the first bundle of proposed amendments to the UDO that the full council should see in August and then again in September, on September 10th on their agendas. And we're going to look at a detailed dive into the August amendments. Those are coming next month. So we're going to look at those in detail. But also we're going to give you a high level overview of the items that are proposed for the September 10th agenda, as staff is still working out some of the details and getting those just right, getting those fully baked. And like I said, we're kicking off everything Stephanie just went over. I think you're going to see a lot of parallels into the process that was just discussed and these amendments themselves. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so just a quick reminder, I won't go over all this. We just spent a lot of time on it. But what you're going to see for August, September is really already determined the what. Some of the how is done. We're still working on some of the how. And some of these were already reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission with a favorable recommendation. That was really a really good kickoff to a good, strong staff and Planning and Zoning Commission collaboration on getting some workable amendments proposed. And then we're going to provide a high-level review on September items. We're not really going to discuss flag lots and backyard lots, as we've already kind of reviewed those, and we haven't baked in many changes on those yet. Next slide, please. All right, so let's get started. So bundle one, talking about what's going to come your way in August. And again, on some amendments that were initiated at the request of the Planning and Zoning Commission and reached the form where they are today through some great collaboration between staff and that commission to get these into amendments that could work in the framework Stephanie was talking about, how the UDO touches, one amendment touches many things, and we need to make sure we're codifying things that make it easier to develop. So both of these amendments aimed at off-street parking updates and development thresholds are aimed at making residential development easier in the city, a little less complex for folks to do. And the first of those is represented by the first bullet on your screen here. And it just gets a bullet point because it's a really simple concept. We're looking to facilitate residential development citywide by removing the requirement to provide a minimum number of parking spaces for residential projects. So just to say, what does that mean? It means like right now on most projects, every unit up to 2 bedrooms requires 1 parking space to be built. Every unit up to at 3 bedrooms and above requires 2 parking spaces to be built. That would go away. The UDO would still contain a maximum parking allowance to reduce the amount of impervious surface and land we're dedicating to the parking of vehicles, but the requirement per zoning to install a minimum number of parking spaces for each residential unit would go away. Right now, we already do that within the CBD zoning district and for residential projects within a mile of that CBD zoning district. So you can look at this as an extension of that exemption for residential projects. So that is the First Amendment. The second that you'll see in August is an amendment aimed at facilitating housing production by changing the threshold that triggers conditional zoning. So most of you probably hear staff and others talk about level 1 project review, level 2 project review, level 3 project review, obviously, because those are many of the conditional zonings that end up on the full council agenda. And right now we have a threshold that requires residential projects to come to council. So how is this being proposed to be changed? So at the high level, right here on the screen, you've got a little table that talks about 2 different types of residential development, right? All attached residential, so residential units that are attached to another residential unit, and single family detached residential. Right now, those types of residential development are all bundled into one threshold that requires them to become a level 3 conditional zoning review. And that is everything 50 units or higher, right? So if we have 50 single family homes being built with accompanying infrastructure, or if we have an apartment building with 50 apartments in it, those are required to be conditionally rezoned, and therefore they require council approval. The amendment is going to take the different approach of those 2 different types of residential review. For single family detached residential. So when I say that, think about one family or residential entity living in one structure, right? Is going to maintain that 50 unit or higher threshold to go to a level 3 or conditional zoning. Those detached developments do require a good bit more infrastructure generally to serve individual road networks, a little more stormwater because of more impervious quite often. They can have a higher impact and use up more land. So that's one reason of keeping that there. I do also want to say that I believe we have reviewed one development that would trigger this with single family homes in the 12 years I've been employed with the city. We don't have a lot of open land in Asheville. We do not see a lot of very large single family detached home subdivisions in the city limits. The way this would change is we would take all attached residential. So that's anything, again, that is dwelling units that are attached to each other. It could be a townhome, could be a duplex, could be an apartment building. And that's going to move to a gross square foot threshold. So that means anything up to 99,999 square feet could be reviewed at the ministerial staff level just as a by right project, and we're just making sure it complies with what the UDO says it has to comply with. And anything at 100,000 gross square feet or higher would trigger that level 3 and that conditional zoning review and would come to city council. Now, the reason we are looking at now a gross square foot threshold rather than unit really is about incentivizing units and attainability and things such as that. One thing we learned from the missing middle housing study is that housing price is directly related to unit size. That is one factor, right? And when you're looking at a gross floor area threshold for that level 3 development, then if a developer chose to put more attainable, possibly smaller units in there, there's an incentive as they can get more units in that 100,000 square feet than they could with larger units, right? This would also kind of cascade down the different levels of site plan review that are in the UDO now. So we would have an increased threshold for level 1 reviews, which again are ministerial, reviewed by staff for UDO compliance only. And then level 2 developments, which would be those that could go all the way up to 99,999 square feet. And again, those are reviewed by staff. They get a little more scrutiny as the technical review committee does a formal review on those. But again, that is just a ministerial review to ensure it complies with the UDO. What does this look like at the 100,000 gross square foot threshold? We took a look at all the developments going back to, I have the slide up here. Going back to the beginning of 2022, there have been 23 level projects that came to you as conditional zoning projects because they triggered that level 3 threshold. If this zoning amendment had been in place, that 100,000 gross square foot threshold, that would have reduced those 23 by 5. 5 projects would have no longer been level 3 conditional rezoning projects and would not have come to city council. So that is a start to expanding that threshold and may leave some room in there still for consideration of things like incentives to affordable housing developments and things like that that are not baked into this amendment now. All right. Yeah, it might be a good time to pause for some questions on that one.
Well, yeah, because the next one's going to landscaping. So is this the best time to really talk about these two
I'm totally fine with that. Well, it's fresh in our minds.
that work for the committee? Okay. I'm curious. So I know it was the P&Z meeting where they said, you know, if you're a commercial building, it's 100,000 square feet. Why isn't residential treated the same? And that's where this idea was born. I'm curious if you all looked at it or anyone has talked about something that council has been talking about, which was just looking at the unit number. So you just gave some awesome data that there have been 23 in the last 2 or 3 years that we've reviewed, and only 5 would have shrunk at 100,000 square feet. But I'm wondering if we have that data for unit count too. Like, should we be looking at unit count, or does anybody have a reason that we've hung with the square footage? My initial conversations with, I thought Brad said this, that the square footage might have some legal things that could be messy, that it might be better to go with units. Have we discussed units at all, or we've just been discussing what P&Z put forward?
We did as staff, we did concur that that using that size did incentivize maybe more attainable units being developed because of, well, what we found with the missing middle housing study as well. Looking at unit counts, I've done some analysis on that. I'm trying to give me an answer right this second.
Well, it's okay, but I mean, I just want to know we've even discussed it. So staff is really in the same vein of the square footage right now. And then the other thing I've heard council kind of talk about that's missing from this recipe is the community benefits table overlay district kind of thing. Like right now we're talking citywide, right? This is a proposal citywide. But if we wanted to do anything that was focused on transportation corridors or something, we could, what are you guys thinking? Give more incentive somehow to those corridors? Are you thinking points? Like how has this become more of what we're hinting at, which you guys just hinted at too, which was how would we get more affordability? Are you?
Yeah, and that's the thing about this being somewhat incremental. You know,
Yeah.
we looked at the data and said, hey, 5 of your 23 since 2022 would have been incentive from here. It doesn't feel like a huge impact, but it does leave room for incentives, right? Whether that's incentivizing being on a transit route, incentivizing affordability, incentivizing lots of things. There's lots of cities out there doing this with incentives to meet city goals, right?
I guess what I'm asking is, should we be looking at it as an overlay district with other criteria, including the community benefits table? I mean, that's just what I'd heard council thinking, but maybe I'm missing that this other thing is actually better.
I think from a staff perspective, what we've seen that makes sense is really incentivizing development to do what we want it to do, right? And we all know a big thing for these developments is having to go through that conditional zoning legislative process. That removes a lot of certainty from the development process for these developers, increases the time it takes, makes it hard to get the funding, and
I totally agree. I would love to get us to prescribed format for this that is less tenuous than what it is. It's been heavily politicized. That said, the politicization of it often grants bigger rewards for the community in the form of these things like affordability levels or sparing trees in certain areas and stuff. So I'm trying to kind of meld the two. Like, how do we, this is why that hotel overlay as a comparison always kept coming up. You know, if we were going to have the hotels, what can we do to make them more impactful, and how can we put it in a process that's simpler? I kind of feel this is the same, which is why I'm kind of still in my mind over here on overlay world, which maybe this morphs into. This is a multifamily overlay, or I'm not sure. Ben, go ahead. Help me.
I don't know if I'm going to help or I was just listening. I try not to chime in too much on these, but I think I hear what you're saying. I just wonder if staff needs a little time so take, for example, if the point of the benefits table or the overlay is to increase the production of housing, I just think you want to make sure you're not creating things that maybe are too complex. There may be simpler ways to do that, I guess is what I want to highlight. There may be a range of options you could use to increase the production of housing. It actually may not require a specific overlay or a complex table. And I think that's what Chris was hitting at. There might be some incremental things we can do to build to that. Now, if council wanted us to start there, that's fine. But again, it may take some more analysis, maybe some input from the advisory boards to kind of kick that around a little bit. Because again, I think the goal is, how do we get the production of housing to happen now?
Sure.
And there are incremental steps that really work for that. That's just a thought. Doesn't mean it's correct. Just wanted to introduce that.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, deregulation can sometimes, bear new development. It just on its face. I just wonder too, if it's, I don't know, so integral to also where. It's not just that we want the housing, it's also where, right? And so some of this, when we talk about removing parking minimums in certain areas, like I would be surprised if we just did that citywide, but maybe we would. But I think we'd hear a lot of pushback from neighborhoods. But along transportation corridors, it makes more sense. And it's kind of, this is similar. How do we get, if we're going to talk like 300 apartments, how do we encourage them to be along these corridors? And you envision, like, say we adopt this, then there's a follow-up where there's more incentives if you're near corridors, or how does it blend into this as it is? Or does it not?
It may, if I can try and give you an answer,
Okay.
And build on what Ben said. You're going to see some, by going to more by right development, right? By letting things develop per the code. We have zoning districts now that permit densities that are higher some places than others, right? And in general, those are along our corridors and our mixed use areas like downtown. There's still work to do, but what I want to highlight is in the HB, Highway Business Zoning District, which is lining a lot of our corridors, our transit corridors, our infrastructure corridors. There is a basically double density allowance when a certain level of affordability is met. that we really aren't seeing the utilization of now. And the main reason observationally is because once we hit 50 units, we're conditional zoning anyway, and then you're kind of rewriting the rules for each project regardless. So it's kind of like Stephanie's last presentation pointed out, each code section hits another code section, right? So in this case, if we're enabling by right development, we're also in a way enabling the use of that density allowance and that tool that's already there that hasn't really proven itself effective. And those are the kind of things we can look at as we go. And yeah, I mean, I think some other things we can try and flesh out some more on. There's some really good examples of how incentive-based options within modern development codes are working to produce the what and the where. The things
Sure. And I mean, I get it. It's going to produce more supply. It's going to be easier to build on from the developer side. I just am concerned that we won't get some of our other goals met concurrently. But maybe I just need to absorb more. But so is this the only time PED is hearing it and then it comes to council at our August meeting? Is that right? Like we have one or two meetings from now.
These two right here are in line to go on the August agenda. These were initiated by the Planning and Zoning Commission. We worked closely with them to get them in their final form, and they are eager to see them move forward. So that's why we have asked Maggie to place these on the August agenda at this time.
Did any other committees review it? AHAC, anything? Transit, not nobody, just P&Z.
Multimodal and Transportation Commission has reviewed the parking provision. And we have not reached out with the thresholds beyond P&Z at this point.
I think
oh, sorry, Maggie, go ahead.
I think this is a good test of the process we just talked about with bundling of how much time do we need for each bundle? How many people does it need to go through? How many reviews do we need to have on council? Because if we're going to have these bundles every 4 months, like this is just a good example of the pace. I think that some things will come about. I also had some questions with the parking. I'd like to see a map of this. Or maybe I'm just looking for more detail that will come in the future staff report. I'd gone back to see the P&Z staff report and got a little bit more detail, but there's more nuance to it is what my understanding is. Because as you're saying, there's already a part of the city where this exists. And so visually seeing that would help me at some point. So that's an ask. And so that would help me make decisions just to really understand spatially. Because I think anytime we're talking about land use, like where it actually hits people, just helps me with my decision making. So please and thank you. And then, yeah, I guess it was, see, you hit on this too. Are we talking about removing minimum parking standards everywhere? Or was it only in an extended section from where it currently is? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation is to remove minimum requirements for residential citywide.
For residential in any zone, so whether it's multifamily or single family?
Correct.
So a couple of follow-up thoughts on that. In general, I think that as we grow as a city, we're going to need to have more people that are less car dependent, and we will functionally provide a space where people can be less car dependent. But as we transition, how is that going to work? And I think that if we remove parking requirements, we still aren't deciding or forcing that upon people. The builder and the homeowner will make that choice if they want to use some of their land for that. And so we just kind of get out of the way and let the builder, the homeowner decide. So at a conceptual level, I'm really into this. I think it gets us out of the way for folks to make a decision. It also allows people to build more affordably, because we hear you spend X on the land and then you need to build this big of a house to make up for it. But if you aren't having to build 2-car garages or what have you, it just allows some creativity and flexibility in the size and then the affordability of the unit. And so again, at a conceptual level, really into this. Talk to me, however, about moving it for multifamily. If someone is building a 200 unit thing, apartment building, we're now saying there'll be no minimum parking requirement from zoning. But the reality is, for that builder to get a loan, they're going to need to show some type of parking ratio, right? So what I want to get to is, as an average citizen, even as a cyclist, I'm like, oh my gosh, if you built a 200 unit space down the street from me and had no parking, what's going to happen to the neighborhood? And I can feel a little alarmed about that. But I think the reality is that we're one piece of the puzzle in what fundamentally determines how much parking get built in multifamily, because we're a local regulation, but the lender, the financing, all of that could factor in. So it's not like if we got rid of parking minimums, no one would ever build parking again. Am I editorializing, or am I kind of summarizing kind of some dynamics that we're seeing for what would roll out if we were to remove this?
What we've seen in looking at this as staff, I'll give you two examples. One of them is a little more generalized without numbers. We've seen the city of Raleigh has removed these parking minimums, but we have gone through and looked at their projects that are available to look at on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Less parking is being provided, but parking is still being provided on those projects. Now, a more local example, staff has looked at and cited 13 projects that are within that existing area, that 1 mile allowance, right, for not having off-street parking for residential projects, 1 mile of the CBD. Of those 13 projects that don't require off-street parking, every one of them is still providing it, right? And about 38% of those are providing less parking than they are required to by the code.
Okay, so we're seeing it on the ground in Raleigh.
Mm-hmm.
We're just getting out of the way, and then the builder is having more of a choice, and it is resulting in less parking. I like the sounds of that.
And the thing is too, I think it depends on the project itself and the developer. Because a lot of times, say for instance, if you're building houses that cater to a senior or older population, what I've noticed that they don't have a lot of automobiles. And if you ever go to some of these developments, you'll see there's plenty of parking because most of them do not. And then say for instance, like Satan talked about, the ones that actually build closer to the hubs, transportation hubs, they all automatically won't be inclined to put in all this parking, where they know a lot of the clientele that live there will probably be using transit. So I think it just depends, Meg, on the projects themselves. So it gives the developer, because he knows the kind of clients he's trying to attract. So that way he can determine, how much parking he will need. And like I said, you just got a lot of different factors as to that goes into that. And that would keep us a lot of times from having people to put in parking that's not necessary. And it also behooves the developer because he can put more units in. So I could see why they want to do it by right and give them more flexibility.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot of sense. And I do understand too the by using the square feet as opposed to the units, because that itself can be very advantageous as far as developing more units, depending on if you want to do a lot of studios or depending on different things. You could actually, a developer could actually use that to actually increase housing to some degree in certain areas, especially near the transportation hubs.
Yeah, that's the one where I do wonder, Sage, the points that you were bringing up about how this connects to where we want growth make a lot of sense to me, and I'm curious to see that. I know that we'll be having bundles and series of bundles, but the incentive versus requirements versus basically a red carpet incentive, right? By getting rid of a CZ, that's all churning around in my mind. A point though that you mentioned, Chris, that I'm really stuck on is that this change would have shifted the outcome for 5 projects out of 23. Is that too incremental? Is what I want to spend some time thinking about, because I mean, the affordable housing plan said we need 14,000 more units. We have what, like 45 right now? That's a phenomenal amount of new neighbors. And so, yeah, I don't have as much an opinion between the unit size, the unit quantity, or the square footage, but I'd like us to think on this some more about, is this too incremental? Is it too broad brush? Does it need to be more locationally directed, as Sage brought up? I don't have an answer. I'm very much in a thinking it through with y'all space. But fundamentally, I want to go in a direction where we're looking at this trigger differently. And I'm ready for us to do that. And want to think on what it says on the page.
I'm less concerned about the parking, more concerned about this housing component. And I'll try to explain why, because I'm realizing you two are not on the housing committee with Antoinette and Shanika and I. And we have been meeting with Jara and the plan over there for many, many months. And one of the things that I asked him recently as we're rolling out this affordable housing plan, and I brought it up at the council meeting, but I don't think it was really received clearly. At some point, we're so far behind in affordability that just simply freeing up the market and say building the 5,000 units we wish we had already tomorrow wouldn't actually produce the lower targets we need. I mean, in theory, yes. I mean, I studied planning in grad school. Produce more housing, prices should come down. But then you have to layer in that we're also seeing a huge influx of people from other areas. And it was the opinion of our hired expert that without tied to incentives and programs, and partners, literally partners came up, that our partners are actually producing more affordable units than we ever can. Without those things, we would not achieve the affordability. So here's what I'm wondering, and maybe it's more just a data request. I would like to get information that sounds like you've already started collecting it on these projects, maybe even back to 2020 or something, this last little boom we've had since COVID, because things changed starting 2020 and population started relocating faster. So like all these projects that went to CZ, how many units they had, what their square footage was, and how many units ended up being approved affordably, and like an incentive produced affordable unit. Because my concern here is we might get more housing, but it may not have any affordability unless we tie a program to it, an incentive to it. And the incentive to get by council simply isn't enough for a developer to do it. I mean, it might help, but they don't want to come to us because they know we're going to want affordable housing. So, and other things, I just worry. I'm throwing up a caution flag that we know from our other housing experts that without partners, plans, and funded incentives, we won't get the affordable units. And this is maybe why I'm so attached to the overlay and the table of benefits, because through that, we'd get it. Yes, you can skip council and do all these wonderful sped up processes if you have green infrastructure or buy transit or have affordable units. But we're not saying any of that, to be clear, in this process. What's coming to us doesn't include any of that. I might have a problem getting to a point of adoption because of that. And I know rationally more housing can bring down prices, but I don't think it will equal the same. And maybe the data can tell me something different, but I believe we'll find if all these CZ projects we reviewed produced, 700 or something units, like we just wouldn't get them. So we're going to have to interconnect this conversation with our affordable housing goals and how that gets us there. And rant. That data would be very helpful to me.
Yeah, I'd love to see that data too. A question back to you, Sage, though, is like, it sounds like what you're saying is you only want to make changes. Like, to me, I see a puzzle where we need to be working on protection of existing homes and existing tenants and renters and owners, preservation of the existing stock, and production of new. And I don't know, it almost sounds like unless the production has community benefit leverage, you don't want to see that. I worry that there just won't be enough projects, period, that meet additional community benefits. I think that we need to address supply in and of itself and affordable housing and do both and not either or.
I mean, I agree. On the face of that, I agree. I think what we'll find if we studied all these projects, put them into some kind of table, is that, we, by way of our approval process, got them to do things they wouldn't normally have done. And because we cannot force them to include affordable housing in the state of North Carolina, these inroads and back, whatever, behind the scenes conversations, incentive programs, all of it are the only way we've really achieved it. So yes, we need to preserve. Yes, we need to protect. Yes, we need to build more. But if you're going to build 300 or 400 units, 200 units, I do feel a portion of them could be affordable, and that the development should take that into its pro forma at the beginning. And they will not have the impetus to do that if we're just simply saying go big. And I just have still some concerns layering in. I had imagined this process, which I'm very excited about, getting freer opportunities for development to have cleaner, simpler, clearer processes in building our housing. I'm excited about that, but I am hesitant about it not having any programmatic other pieces. There's not a single other programmatic piece. It's just raise the threshold. And that means that it simply won't come to council. And that is where all of the meat and juice and sausage making happens. So for me, I've been tying it to an alternative process that is clearer and all those things, but includes the sausage making at their pro forma level before it comes to staff application. However, parking, maybe we're at a place where the community is not paying attention. I'll be surprised if they're not worried about parking going away everywhere. But I guess if I'm using 767 Haw Creek as an example, this lower one of the 50 units, separate units, would still have held in that case. So it doesn't mean Haw Creek would have happened, for example. Did P&Z, I didn't know that P&Z had this particular piece about the detached units. Is this a P&Z thing too, and does staff support all of these, and P&Z supported all of these?
I mentioned a lot of collaboration between P&Z and staff on this one, and we wrote up some memos and presented some different options to Planning and Zoning Commission. The 50 unit detached is, of course, as I mentioned, there is a lot more infrastructure that comes with these detached unit communities. We haven't seen detached communities that large, but also there is a practical side and a housekeeping side to tracking things like stormwater allowances for single family detached communities. And we did ask P&Z to consider keeping a unit count threshold for those detached.
The only thing I've heard about the single family detached is the subdivisions are not getting through, but they have like 18 to 20 units or something. But I have been hearing that from the developer forum kind of level. When we start doing these developer forums, we might hear that creep up again. But that's the first time I'd heard it. So just more questions. But okay, that's all for me. It would really be helpful to get that information. I know it's a lot to ask of y'all, but maybe you're already working on it and it could just be.
We have so much of what you're asking for pretty much ready to go. Just
okay, great. I hate to ask for more. Okay.
Yep. So.
Thank you.
All right. Before I say next slide, anything else on these two amendments? This is probably the meatiest one, so it's okay that y'all dug in here. But all right, next slide then, please, Katie. Okay, talking about some other updates in Bundle 1. This would be looking at a September appearance. This would be looking at some updates to the landscaping code, which is 711.3 of the UDO, and tree canopy protection in section 719. Just a broad level of these future updates. We really want the landscaping code 711.3 to better align with the comp plan and, again, make it easier and more predictable to develop in Asheville. One example of that is removing the requirement for small multifamily projects to provide landscape buffers with single family, right? So we're talking not 200 unit mega things, but smaller multifamily projects and getting rid of that type B buffer requirement. Tree canopy protection updates will look at adding a third optional measuring tree canopy to make site planning easier and more predictable, as well as implementing some different credit techniques for counting large specimen heritage trees, however that gets defined. We've been working with the Urban Forestry Commission for a while on that one. So that should get baked up into you. Next slide, please.
I want to step on this one real quick. remind me of the process it took to get here? Like who was part of these, what committees?
Oh, we've had a lot. Of course, the Urban Forestry Commission has had a lot of input to give staff on these amendments. Their landscaping updates really has worked with kind of a cross section of folks that includes some Urban Forestry Commission members, some members of our Development Customer Advisory Group as well, that have met really with a laser focus on looking at these landscape updates. Tree Canopy has been working primarily with Urban Forestry Commission. Some of this has made its way to the Development Customer Advisory Group that Planning and DSD work with as well. That is a group you hear less about, but it is a group made up of engineers, contractors, lawyers, and people involved in the development of property, and really has served as a good counterbalance to help us try and develop effective ordinance amendments that work on both levels.
Yeah, I look forward to reading into the details of this. This high level leaves a lot of questions, but I guess that'll come through when it comes towards council. So look forward to digging into this one.
All right. So another thing we're going to talk about, we've mentioned a few times, corridors, transportation and infrastructure corridors, and focusing development. As we move towards more by right development in these corridors, there's some modernization that needs to happen in these zoning districts. And again, this is in September. This is a high level. We're still working through this, and this still needs to come through Planning and Zoning Commission. But the basic element we're looking at here is reducing the very large 35-foot required building setback in this district to something a little more workable and friendly to the urban environment, the walkable environment, and transit supportive environment. And also clarifying the language that's there right now for pedestrian and urban-oriented design, which allows an even smaller setback when certain conditions are met. Things like, let's not put the parking between the building and the street, and let's make sure that the building addresses that right of way, right? And operates with that right of way. So that would be in the HB and RB zoning district, which covers a lot of our broad transit corridors and infrastructure corridors. Next slide, please. We're also going to be looking to bring in September 2 to 3 options for the imperfectly named right now, but we all know what we're talking about, anti-displacement overlay for achieving larger housing supportive amendments, right? So we'll be acknowledging that some residents of our city are more vulnerable to displacements than others, and trying to find a way to quantify and make sure we understand how that's going to impact folks. We're going to look for qualitative input from communities as well as quantitative input, things that we can measure with demographics and development patterns. We're looking at that now. 2 to 3 options, minimum of 2, will come to council for consideration, and we're going to talk with you further at the August PED meeting on this as we develop further options and get the roadmap a little more clear. All right, next slide. All right. Okay, so that is the detailed dive into what's proposed right now to come to full council in August, and a high level on the September amendments, and does serve as kind of a soft kickoff to updating the UDO. So I will stop talking for any questions you still have on this one.
Chris, I do. If you go back a couple of slides where you talk about the threshold, this one, minimum front. What would be good if you had some type of diagram or something that you could show the difference in the 35 and the 15, so council could sort of see exactly what you talked about? That would be great.
Absolutely.
And if this is a good time to talk about the other setbacks between multifamily and single family, bring them to us.
Yeah.
What I'm referring to is when multifamily sits next to single family, it needs, I believe it's 15 on the sides, and it might even be 20 in the back setback. And when multifamily sits, or when single family sits next to commercial, it's still 5. So there's just a weird anomaly there that you actually have to create a bigger buffer between housing than you do. This came up when we reviewed in Ingalls. and the housing behind it. And it's, I don't know if you want to try and wrap it up in this one, but just plugging that one out there still needs addressed.
Yeah, it does make me wonder. I think as we start digging into this stuff, it's just going to be like a slinky, a cascade of like, well, what about this one that's related? And we're trying to thread the needle between comprehensive in so many places. Like can you guys pull off some of those between now and then? Or is that more like we're just adding stuff to the next bundle for us to be considering on the bundle list?
And I was just wondering too, like say you were talking about some of the incentives for affordability that we feel that we may miss by doing that by right. What would be good is maybe you could also put on the website for developers to see the incentives that we offer if they are building there. I'm just saying to say, we offer this. So in case, they are building, they could sort of maybe decide themselves. Okay, Stephanie, I'm sorry. But that's something that we could do in case.
They're up there, yeah. We have our
and so,
website is pretty broad. There's a ton of tools and listings and
yeah.
tools and forms. Staff have done a good job with that.
And so Sage, in other words, so if that's the case, and we just sort of list them as incentives, then they could actually, what happens if, because they don't have to come to us, but what happens?
No, they might choose to fill in
that's what I'm saying.
affordable units. They might.
And if they decide to take advantage of some of the things we're offering, right? Okay.
They may.
Then how does that happen, Chris? Do they just sort of
our other biggest tool, I think we learned that the Housing Trust Fund produces more units because it's a low interest loan. And it ties to affordability, right? So that's when you get into developments, there probably aren't 300 units because they're looking at a much bigger loan. But if you're looking at smaller, maybe. And then the other one is our LUIG, Land Use Incentive Grant, right? And to do that, you get a tax abatement or rebate, whatever you want to call it, grant. We're going back to grant. But until the county partakes in that one, it's not going to equate to the same value as the cost of producing a unit. So it might just be that if this passes, we see a surge. Thousands of units are built and we meet the demand of those higher end desires in the community, and then rents start coming down because they're not full. It might mean that. I mean, that's kind of the theory here. I just am cautioning us that in our economy, when the rents are just escalating, I think it's been 45% in the last 2 years or something. I'm not sure we'll hit that anytime soon. And meanwhile, our affordability goals will just be flat on their face.
But I will say this, Sage, and I'm just sort of, now I have noticed that as far as rents, I do some property management. And basically, I've actually had situations where our rents are beginning to ease down on units. I don't know exactly what that means, but what I heard was that some of the short-term rentals were actually converting to long-term. This is what I've heard from some of the landlords. And so it does sort of, actually, it may help to have more housing, and it will impact it faster than you may think. Because like I said, I'm just shocked to see some of the numbers now.
It will help to have more housing.
Yeah.
If it creates affordability in the windows of time and the ranges we needed is the unknown. And you're right. I'm hearing the same thing about short-term rentals. And I wonder if some of it is the adoption of the kitchens, and it's really that these short-term rentals have become so prolific that there are so many that the competition between them is so much.
Yes.
And so it's actually, they're not making all the revenues they were. So then all of a sudden our high long-term rentals are meeting their budgets just as well, and they're converting. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And not only that, what's happening with a lot of the short-term rentals is they're actually sort of having more issues with turnover and things like that. So like you said, there's more stability in the long term because the long term are actually getting decent rates now. Does that make sense?
It's true. Yeah.
And I find that a lot of people that actually reach out that want to buy here in Asheville, a lot of times they say, we want to do short-term rentals. And the realtors are saying, no, you don't want to do short-term rentals because we have, this issue now where we're trying to sort of cut back. And a lot of them are turning away.
Yeah.
And I've heard that a lot. So, it's still. Go ahead, Meg.
I'm sorry, I'm just sitting here like churning on a thought that's just kind of coming to fruition. Kiddo just got home from camp. And I'm on video though, babe. Excuse me. About the thresholds and an approach for by right. I guess I hear the concern that you're saying, Sage, and I agree that we need to like accelerate all of our incentives, our programs, our loans for affordability, that our affordable housing plan is like, we just got it done. We're ready to rock. We're starting a cyclical bond program where we'll be able to put more and more money into it. I don't know if there's an either or though, if we do this by right. Like, do you think some of it is just that without seeing those other things bundled and packaged in the same presentation? Like, because we're doing so much and we're preparing, and really, honestly, because a lot of your leadership on the HCD community, we're about to really unleash a whole new way of incentives. Yeah. And so I guess I feel this sounds either or like, and I see this being both and as being really necessary. There's just so many problems we have that can't take one strategy to solve the problem, and it needs multiple ones. And I see this approach around use by right being a really powerful one to complement the gangbusters work we're doing already for the incentivization.
It's true. And I mean, it does, I say all the time, it's all hands on deck, you know, and this is one more tool. And what we might see then is that we strategize our partnerships and incentives more with tax credit projects or something, that we get more strategic in that avenue. And those, we become, you know, partners in building affordable housing here, and there's a different complex here, and maybe it has none. And I think what's happened is for many years now, we've been working to get these mixed income communities, and some of these things are going to go the opposite direction. But I think it might be okay. It might not just be mixed in the building, but the community will still be mixed.
And we might also see, you know, like if we go back to the slide that's talking about units versus square footage, we know that smaller footprints are naturally much more affordable. And so if we're having kind of this square footage play, and we know that the quantity of units increases profitability for the builder, we might see units that are, you know, who needs a 500 square foot bathroom, for crying out loud? You know, if we really start to bring the unit size down on some of these things, we'll see some affordability in that as well, which does make me think that the square footage approach has some merit. But I do go back to if this change would only have accelerated the outcome of 5 out of 23 projects, is this too incremental?
Yeah, the one that comes to mind is the Patton Place. It's being built right now, or the Avery, I'm sorry, it's next to Patton Place. It's being built right now. Because we turned it down at first, we voted it down, and it came back with more affordable units, and we approved it. And there's a tell right there, would not have done them without it, right? But maybe that's appropriate. You know, maybe this is literally just a supply conversation, and we can imagine that, you know, we're already saying we're not seeing big single family developments because there's not a lot of land. So we're, you know, at some point we're going to run out of land.
Just one question, Sage. I just wonder how many developments that we actually have that we've actually worked with to get the affordable ability in that have not been built yet.
How many have we granted lead to or something that hasn't been built? There's still some in the pipeline, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying, but they're sitting in the pipeline and nothing's being done. I just want
ironically, because like one of them is the micro units with no parking and based on square footage, yeah. Because there's something with financing, which may be about parking.
That's the reason I was just saying how many of those projects that may be sitting that are not moving forward, that some of these things may be able to help. I was just asking.
Yeah. I really don't know. And I think the data will be so helpful for my brain. So I can stop philosophizing on everybody's time.
I like this style of conversation, though. It really feels like what we're asking staff to do is don't come to us when it's in permanent marker and the last thing you want to do is cross the T and S. Like I feel like we're in the work together, and all the comments both of you are bringing up are really helping me think about this more. And I like that we're getting this level of in the thinking that'll help me in the next month while I'm really in my decision-making mode. So I'm really
Well,
appreciating.
let me share this perspective. This will be the last thing I share. Then I do what I call exit interviews with developers after they build housing projects. I often meet with them throughout the way just because they reach out to me sometimes because I am also in that field and things come up and it's like, why is this way? And why didn't this work out? Or why aren't you guys going to build it? And so on. What I have learned is it's not that we want affordable or we want all these extra criteria. They're not necessarily afraid of that. They don't like the process. They don't like having to come to council, be admonished by their neighbors, put in the spotlight as big, bad developer, even though they may have been raised here. It's not the criteria that gets them over the threshold that is bothering them so much as the process. And I say that because I think we could have a process that included benefits like affordable units or in lieu funds or trees, whatever it is, the criteria we want, solar or something else. I think we could get it and still see development growth and simplify and clarify the development process for developers. And we'd see what we're getting now, but without it coming to us, as opposed to just freeing it up and hoping we get some good out of it. And I say that from my experience of meeting with the developers that are building in our community.
Well, like I said, I just think the more barriers that we remove for them, I think that will help.
Yeah.
I just
Speaking probably so.
Yeah.
I'm really excited we're talking about all this though.
Me too.
Yeah. It feels like
These are great
hard
conversations.
topics, big decisions.
Chris, is there anything else, or is that the last slide?
We have run through all the slides. We've gotten some really valuable feedback from you all. And I think we know where to go from here on answering some of these questions. So thank you.
So anyone else have any comments before we, okay? Jim?
I just want to ask one question, just a clarification. So just to make sure, because we want to meet your expectations. So the thresholds change and the removal of parking, those were amendments that were initiated by P&Z that planning staff worked with them on together. Does PED want those to come back to PED before they go to the August council meeting, or are we fine to stay on planning zoning's schedule, which I think is just to go to council without another trip to PED?
Do you want a recommendation from PED? Because I don't sense we get that today. But if you're trying to get it to council with a recommendation from more than just P&Z, that's up to you. I mean,
I'm gonna let the planners answer that, but I will say traditionally, we have only gotten recommendations on wording amendments from P&Z. That doesn't mean it already feels like we're using PED differently moving forward. So to an extent, but I don't know the answer. I'll let maybe Steph try to answer that. Good question.
Yeah, I think it is a good question, and I think it's somewhat negotiable, but what we were envisioning was that you really are telling us the what and allowing things to move through pretty swiftly. And if there's like a big objection, then you're holding some things back. And one thing I can note is that you do have, as Chris laid out really well for you, as I said he would, he's going to be bringing you some other amendments at next month's PED already to go into detail, right? So if there are, I don't think, and to your question, to be really pointed, I don't think it's necessary to get a recommendation from PED to go to council on this item. But what we do want to know is if there's like
Red flag.
if there's red flags, that's what we want. We want to know.
My sense from what I'm hearing from my peers is we're just processing what are the implications. I think we're glad to be having this conversation. Glad to know it's not necessarily seeking a recommendation today, but I'll speak for myself. I think a month before this comes to council, actually a little bit longer at that point, is enough time for me to be in community, asking questions, thinking of creative alternatives, like to doing that work outside of before council has a full conversation. Because ultimately, this is a big, interesting conversation that everyone's going to need to weigh in on. So I feel like I have sufficient time to not delay it an additional month. So going straight to council works for me and gives me the time to keep thinking on this and keep kind of getting creative and talk to a lot of people in the community.
Okay. And then regarding, we have a list of things that you would like more information on. Maybe that is how we use next month's PED as far as delivering a memo to you in advance, right? That answers all those questions, but it's not an actual agenda item. And we'll spend our time in the meeting on the next amendments and other topics that you need to cover.
Yeah, I think that rhythm's worked on other committees where it's we're helping shape the more detail to make sure that y'all are kind of sketching out where there's a lot of questions. So by the time it comes to council, we've informed the picture of data that helps us think about it. It sounds nice.
Thank you. Okay, at this time, we have no more questions. We'll ask Katie, do we have anyone in the queue with public comment?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have a couple. Just one moment. Caller ending in 7632. Your line is now open and you have 3 minutes to speak.
Good afternoon, Commission. This is Jared Wheatley. I am calling as a private resident of downtown. I just wanted to say thank you to staff and everyone on PED. It was a super exhilarating conversation. It was great to hear the debate about the upcoming text amendments. It was also really cool to hear housekeeping with our UDO and kind of reduction of administrative burden within our UDO. And it's really cool to see staff take that leadership position as we try to craft a better path forward, more aligned with the comp plan. With regards to the UDO amendments for parking, residential parking minimums being removed and thresholds, I know Planning and Zoning Commission received more positive public comment on these items than any other item that's come before us. And I also function as the liaison to Multimodal Transportation Committee and got to hear their enthusiasm for the removal of parking minimums directly. They actually pushed for Planning and Zoning to consider broader implementation of removing those parking minimums. So that was really, really cool kind of feedback to receive. With regards to the thresholds, I know it's a little bit more complicated, but it's really about equity because right now office buildings and other commercial spaces are allotted 100,000 square feet, where a multifamily apartment, which averages about 850 square feet per unit, if you take that times 50, only gets you about 43,000 square feet. So we have a false cap on our multifamily buildings, which is a little bit tough in the climate of hoping for multifamily. And so I think that's just kind of the spirit of the UDO amendment. And though it may not touch many projects, I think it opens a door for innovation for the smaller multifamily projects that would be reaching more between 50 and 100 units and staying below some of those bigger projects you see coming before on the conditional rezonings. So once again, I appreciate everyone on this call's leadership. It's been really awesome to hear everyone collaborating and working for the betterment of our community. Thank you.
Okay. Caller ending in 8684. Your line is now open and you have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Tim Watkins. I'd like to thank you guys for talking about these upcoming UDO amendments. And I'd like to encourage you to view the UDO text amendments as something that can change with time. We cannot let perfect be the enemy of the good when it comes to these amendments. We needed housing yesterday. We needed housing years ago. But if we continue to search for the perfect amendment, we're going to keep getting in our own way of encouraging density in our city. I went to city council a few weeks ago where there was a long discussion about the budget and the crunch that we're in. And if we do not encourage more density and more building, then we're just going to have this conversation every single year, and services are going to get cut. I understand that there's a concern about not incentivizing enough affordable housing, and we wouldn't see rents decrease in the time frame that we need them to see. But if we look at Austin, which Austin, of course, has many things that are different than Asheville, they really started increasing their building in 2022, quarter one, and we're seeing rents fall 2 years later in 2024. So if we incentivize building, rents come down. We know this. So I just encourage you guys, as we get more and more text amendments coming through, just keep remembering don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. We have to make some changes or else we're going to get what we have now, which is ever increasing rent rates. So thank you so much.
That was all we had in the queue, but let me reload just to double check. No one else wanted to speak. Okay, Vice Mayor, that is all we had for public comment.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's all we have today. We have a couple of items coming up in August. We have the Y 2024 committee work plan review, and also the FY 2025 work plan development. And we have an update on construction, permitting volumes and value, and missing housing reform, and Rankin Avenue substation will be coming up in August. In September, we'll have a Reed Creek Greenway feasibility study, and also have a review of the proposed micro mobility related ordinance update. And with that being said, if there's no other comments, we're adjourned.
Thanks, everybody. Great work. Great discussion. Really excited for sorting through this complex stuff.